Hello, 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 participants. I see you all coming in and the numbers are rising and I'm super thrilled to see that. I really appreciate the excitement and the energy that all of you are bringing to today's webinar. If you're listening to me on the Pathable app, I would highly recommend you come on into the Zoom application. I'm going to be looking at the Pathable chat, but if you really want to make sure your questions get answered, I would encourage you to please come in through the Zoom app so I can see you on the Zoom app because that's right in front of my face. Hey, Trent, saw your invitation on LinkedIn. Very happy to connect. Folks, find me on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I love chatting with people on LinkedIn. So if you haven't yet, please do go out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I hope I share some interesting and fun stuff. We are just about 1 minute past the top of the hour, and I'm going to give folks a chance to come on in. I know this session was full, so we do want to give folks a chance to come on in. I know how it is when you're trying to transition from one or two things. So the numbers continue to rise, and folks are going to be getting the link on Pathable as soon as we get a stable count. So while we're here, why don't you tell me what country you're coming in from? What country is everybody coming in from? You can say it in the Pathable app. You can say it in the chat. All right, I know there's going to be my US folks. Hello, US folks, Scotland, Brazil, Iceland, Costa Rica. Oh my God, Costa Rica. So my team is actually in Costa Rica, and I just adore my folks down there. We're planning, hopefully at some point, we can have an offsite at the Costa Rica location. Oh, Sweden, we got Boston. Oh, yeah, I will come on down, Victoria. Absolutely. Hey, Dallas. I live in New Mexico, so I'm waving at Texas right now. I'm not sure if that's the right distance, but you know, hey. Welcome, Georgia, Mexico, another Dallas Bay Area. Folks, I'm looking at the Pathable over here. I'm looking at the Zoom chat over there. Again, folks, if you're in Pathable, come on over to Zoom. It'll make it a little easier for me to answer your questions because there are a lot of y'all. Right now, we're currently sitting at 266 people, and I'm going to get started in 1 minute. I'm going to get started in 1 minute. So you are here for Peter's Crochet Along. No, you're here for Imposter Syndrome. I like to think I'm funny. I'm not always. Anyway. So folks, you're here for Battling Imposter Syndrome. And while we're getting started, I will share with you that throughout the pandemic, I've been leading a series of external webinars, 1 hour, through my coaching practice. And one of the two top questions I got asked about, two top topics, was imposter syndrome. The other one is about maintaining and creating healthy boundaries. So really, really important topic. So I'm super glad and excited that we get to talk about this today. And I am super glad and excited that all of you are here with me. So I'm going to get my PowerPoint up. By the way, don't have a lot of charts. I don't keep a lot of charts. I don't do a lot of charts because I really want us to have a good conversation. All righty, so we're going to start that slideshow from here. Okay. Oh my God, Angie, you're crocheting along right now. Good gravy. If I could get my current project and start working on it while we're chatting, I would. But then I'd be paying attention to the crochet and not you all. It is great for ADHD. Crocheting is also fantastic for anxiety. It's fantastic for depression. It is fantastic for screen burnout. And that's why I actually learned. All right, so CV's putting the link in for other folks. We're here to talk about battling imposter syndrome. Oh, I love Legos too. My favorite are always the Batman Legos. This is me, folks. My name is Peter Mostachetti. I'm a licensed master social worker. I am licensed in New York and New Mexico. I currently live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I specialize in one-on-one and group coaching, leadership and professional development. My websites are down at the bottom. I am also, in my day job, I am part of a company called Kyndryl, Kyndryl. And you've never heard of Kyndryl before. And the reason you've never heard of Kyndryl before is because we are the newest spinoff of IBM. So Kyndryl is the world's largest startup at over 90,000 employees worldwide. And we are the IT services division. The only pitch I'm going to give you today is that I am hiring. I got a lot of jobs out there. So if you're in the tech industry and you are looking for a change, you really need to check out Kyndryl. I just posted 26 senior consultant positions out on dice.com. And I've got more that are coming out globally across the US, Canada, all over the world. If you're coming to me from Japan, let's talk. I have jobs. 10A Barker, I wish I had gotten you 2 weeks ago, but seriously, folks, check out Kyndryl. We are looking to make a mark. And so that's me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out my website. I can share with you that I will be starting back up with a series of webinars related to mental well-being, professional and leadership development. I should have a new calendar out there coming in the next couple of weeks. So I will post that on LinkedIn when the time comes. So you want to be connected. Alrighty, so I'm looking at the chat. I'm looking at the, Stuart, you totally got it right, Kyndryl. So I'm looking at the chat, I'm looking at Pathable. So what is imposter syndrome? What is imposter syndrome? It's obviously important since so many of you decided to join me today, but what is imposter syndrome? How do you describe it? Put your answers in the chat. Feeling like you are not good enough at times. Yes, unworthiness, feeling inferior, feeling like you aren't qualified for the position you're in, feeling fake, like you don't belong, negative self-talk. I always call it the negative voice. Let's see, what else? Not feeling you're capable, not feeling you're smart enough, self-doubt. Being in a position you don't feel qualified for, filling, oh, I like this one, Randy, filling a mold that just isn't you. Oh, Chris, it is totally a limiting belief, and we're going to be talking about that. All righty, feeling like I'm in over my head and that I don't belong, the feeling that one's position was obtained illegitimately. Thank you, Giovanni. Peter, fantastic name. Gerard Rao saying I'm a fraud sometimes. Oh, VJ, this is VJ, I would actually say this is probably the worst one that I hear. Am I lying to myself? Good gravy. How tough is that, folks? To feel like you're lying to yourself. And Beth put it in there, it's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. That's the thing about imposter syndrome that makes it such an important topic for me, is that it's an exhausting state of being. So you are all correct. Overthinking your past mistakes. Thank you, Jenny. Deep insecurity on your abilities. Thank you, Andrea. Feeling you're pretending to be qualified for your work, that you know what you're doing, while in reality, you're just sort of faking it. Absolutely, Manuel. Thank you. So imposter syndrome shows up as over-preparing. It shows up as being afraid of being outed as a fraud. It can show up as feelings of unworthy of success, blaming accomplishments on luck, dismissing positive feedback, distrusting others. So it can show up in all of these ways. And I love this graphic. I found this one out on very well. So we know what it is. Imposter syndrome is that negative self-voice. It's that voice that says we're not qualified, capable, that we're just here because of dumb luck. The other ways that imposter syndrome can, oh, Emma, definitely send those jobs over to Gavin. The other ways that imposter syndrome can show up is in procrastination. Unwillingness to say yes to risks and opportunities. Fear of becoming successful past your capabilities. And it can also show up as physical symptoms. So we talked a little bit about that exhaustion. Imposter syndrome and anxiety go hand in hand with one another. So my background is in mental health. I am a corporate social worker. My job is to pick up where the corporate HR function leaves off. So I focus a lot on how human behavior shows up in the workplace. And so I'm constantly thinking from a social worker's perspective about how people show up in the workplace. And there's almost always a connection between imposter syndrome and some sort of an anxiety response. So if we're feeling imposter syndrome, there's almost always a physical symptom. There's almost always an anxiety response. And that anxiety response might be, that feeling in the pit of your stomach. It might be a headache. It might be, 1,000 other physical symptoms. So, one of the things I asked you in the poll, was, how does it feel? How do you know when you're encountering imposter syndrome? And that's really important because our bodies give us such great information about what we're feeling, what's going on. So it's really important in my mind to understand the physical reaction that we're having to imposter syndrome, because that's a clue that it's showing up. So again, strong connections between imposter syndrome and anxiety, really important to pay attention to that feeling. And I would love for you at some point, can be after this session, doesn't have to be right now, go on out to that poll tab and just tell me how it feels for you. Tell me how it feels for you. Any questions so far about what it is or the signs of imposter syndrome? I'm taking a look at the chat right now. And so if you've got any questions, I'm happy to stop for a second and address those. Mikhail, the poll is out on the Pathable page. If you look at the top, you'll see chat, polls, files, and people. And the polls is where you'll find that question. Yes, I will be sharing the slide deck. I will put the PDF out in the files section after this today. All righty, so. So part of why I wanted to have this session today on imposter syndrome is because I really wanted to come here today and validate for the 313 people who are in this session today that this is 100% normal. This is incredibly common. This is incredibly normal. And your feelings around imposter syndrome are incredibly valid. Up to 82% of people report feelings of imposter syndrome. I myself have moments when I feel like an imposter, that I am about to be found out. So imposter syndrome is very common. It's very normal. The second thing I wanted you to hear is that it comes from a lot of places. And you'll notice that I put it can come from. It doesn't necessarily come from. This is your mileage may vary. So where it comes from for you may be different from where it comes from for someone else. So it can come from family dynamics. Maybe you grew up in a family where there were expectations of success. There were high values on education, perfection, your career. Maybe this was a message that you heard over and over again. It might come from a cultural expectation. Different cultures put different values on education, career, and different definitions of success. So perhaps there's a cultural element. Perhaps it's a personality trait. Perhaps you feel like a perfectionist, and perfection is what you're striving for every single day. And if you haven't gotten to perfection, it's not good enough. Total side note, if the perfectionist one is really resonating with you, I highly recommend anything by Brené Brown. She is a really fantastic social worker and researcher around perfection, guilt, shame, vulnerability. Highly recommend checking that out. I just saw a chat that I want to get back to. Growing up with undiagnosed ADHD, always late, always rushed, always procrastinating, always messy. Yes, Angie, I absolutely, if folks are have a diagnosis of ADHD, perhaps they're somewhere on the spectrum, dyslexia, any sort of neurodiversity, may have heard a lot of messages around not being like everybody else, may have heard a lot of messages about not being as good as someone else. This is absolutely where it comes from. This is exactly, these types of experiences are where you find the root of imposter syndrome. And it can come from trauma. We know a lot more about trauma now than we did before. Trauma is no longer the idea of classic PTSD for soldiers. It really has a lot of definitions and a lot of ways that it showed up. You know, part of my practice is around trauma-informed therapy. So it's about looking at people through the lens of what they experienced and how they respond based on that. And absolutely, it can also come from being first in your family to do something. And Sarah, 100%, it can be all of these. There's no one thing that it has to be. It can be all of these. Yeah, Peter, it's so clear how family dynamics can play a role in this. Yeah, Abby, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Trauma about being bullied when you're younger. You know, the thing about imposter syndrome is a very old voice. It is a very old voice. It is a voice that came from one of these places. And chances are, you know, especially when we look at the trauma aspect, it comes from a place where it was dangerous to be different. It was dangerous to be visible. It was dangerous not to look like the norm. And that's super salient to the LGBTQ plus community. That's super salient to anyone who has any sort of aspect of intersectionality, neurodiversity. It could be impacted by race and your race compared to what the predominant demographic was where you grew up. There's a lot of things there that look like not being safe to be visible and to have the spotlight on you. So it came from a time when others may have put you down. It came from a time when it was just better to go along with the crowd and maybe not exceed or excel because that would bring undue attention to yourself. So just I'm looking at what Emma said here. Mine at least partially stems from having to be a model minority. Oh, wow. Yeah, what, you know, such an incredible burden to be placed on an individual to be the model minority. Yeah. Physical disability, queerness, multiple aspects. Again, this comes from multiple aspects, not just one. Tamsin, absolutely. Absolutely. Cameron, yes, there are a lot of things related to mental health that can also impact imposter syndrome, like OCD, like intrusive thoughts. You know, and again, I'm focusing here on the LGBTQ plus community. And when you think about that history of not wanting to have a spotlight on you, about a time when it wasn't safe to be who you were, about potential trauma in your history, then you end up with what's called covering. And 83% of LGBTQ plus people report covering in the workplace. And if you've not heard of covering before, covering was coined by Kenji Yoshino. He is the Chief Justice Earl Warren Professor of Constitutional Law and the director of the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU Law. If you haven't had a chance, take a look at some of his videos out on YouTube. And Kenji coined the term covering, which is basically hiding or downplaying a known stigmatized identity. So it makes perfect sense that if folks at any point in their career had to hide who they were, then they would feel feelings of imposter syndrome. And for some on this session today, you may still be covering who you are at work. For some, you might not be. And even if you aren't, again, I said that imposter syndrome is an old voice. It's not a new one, it's an old voice. So imposter syndrome, even if you had to cover at some point early in your career, that voice is still back there. And so it's perfectly normal that that voice would come up at other times later in your career. And Christine, absolutely, you can cover various parts of yourself. There are lots of things. You know, if you were in the aging workshop yesterday, they talked about covering from an age perspective. So there's a lot of things that we cover. And actually, when I talk about imposter syndrome in a broader audience, I actually go into a very significant piece on covering as well as personal brand. The other piece that I wanted to bring up around where bias and exclusion exacerbate feelings of doubt. So if there's any sort of bias or exclusion where you are, then you're going to exacerbate those feelings of doubt. And the piece to remember, the thing that is so important about imposter syndrome speaks to confidence. It is not about competence. Imposter syndrome speaks to confidence, not competence. Alrighty, folks, I'm just going to take a look at the chat and see if there's any questions. So Diana, have you seen gender play a role? Ab-fab and raised to be a good, modest Latin woman. I feel like that could be a source for me. 100%. Absolutely. Anytime we're forced into a role that someone else assigns to us, the minute we try to break out of that, we're going to have those feelings of imposter syndrome. So there are a lot of ways that this can show up. It might be forced into a role. VJ, covering about your age. Absolutely. That absolutely is a piece. Amy, yes, stop forcing our square peg into a round hole. Yeah, so I think y'all are seeing that it's this idea of, for so often we may have been forced into a square peg. And that's exactly how imposter syndrome shows up. So I have a reflection for you all. And so I would like you to take out a piece of paper, because I'm real big on writing things down. So, and I may even give you homework. I haven't decided yet. But I would like for you to take out a piece of paper and write down, where has imposter syndrome shown up for you? And how did you know? And I want you to be really specific. Think about a situation. Think about a project. Think about a time, a gathering, an event where imposter syndrome showed up for you. And I'd like you to write down. I'm going to give you a good 3 minutes on this one, okay? And I would like for you to write down everything you can think about it. What was it you were trying to accomplish? Who was paying attention? What was going on? So I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and write that down. Where has imposter syndrome showed up for you, and how did you know? And I'm going to put myself on mute so you can't hear me humming to myself. All righty. So just, take the last minute to finish up your thoughts. Again, I hope everybody's writing down where imposter syndrome showed up for you and how did you know, because you're going to use that. You're going to use that in your homework, which I've been encouraged to give. And folks, one of the things I would really like to do right now while folks are finishing up their reflection, I'd like to say thank you. There really is a lot of vulnerability happening in this chat right now. And I am super, I'm humbled by that. I really do appreciate the level of vulnerability I'm seeing in the chat and how much you all are sharing with one another. And for the folks who are watching this happening, and this really is a gift. This really is a gift that folks are sharing this level of vulnerability. And I'm seeing a lot in here around mental health, around neurodiversity. Akshay, I hope I pronounced that correct. My pleasure. My spaces are all about, let's all be vulnerable. Let's talk about what's going on. Yeah, so I really do appreciate that. And I want to thank you for this very humbling gift. And I'd also like to say that as I'm looking at the chat, I would agree. We need to do a much better job of kicking down the closet door on mental health, because mental health, it impacts everyone in some way, shape, or form. It comes everywhere. I saw something go by, so often I see folks who consider themselves bisexual and they feel like imposters because they're not quote unquote bi enough. So even within our own community, we see not gay enough, not bi enough, not this. There's always this feeling of not enough. All righty. Again, yeah, Bree, there's a whole lot of folks every single day who are covering some level of anxiety, depression, mental health challenge, and they're coming into the office every day with that. Folks, I call it my invisible backpack, and I forget who coined that term, but I love it so much because it's the backpack that we all walk in with every single day, stuffed full of stuff. And in that backpack might be what the challenges of just getting up in the morning. It might be the challenges we feel around our projects at work. It might be the challenges we feel about being LGBTQ+. It might be something related to family issues. And every single day we're lugging that thing around. And I always think that the opportunity we have as coworkers is to help make that backpack just a little bit lighter. So I see a lot in the chat about folks where, ultimately, imposter syndrome is about not feeling enough. But here's the good news, because there is some good news. The good news is imposter syndrome is also a really good source of information. It's a really good source of information. And I will share a secret with you that I have learned throughout the years. When it comes to imposter syndrome, the reason why it's so important that we write down where it showed up for us and how did you know is because the thing you're feeling really impostery about is very important. It's an important thing to you. It is something that is related to your values. It is something related to how you see yourselves from a core identity. So, imposter syndrome is really good information about what is important to you. And if you attended the personal branding workshop earlier in the conference, even if you haven't, I highly recommend you check out that recording. Those folks did a really nice job. Personal brand and imposter syndrome go really well together because they both come from a place of values. So imposter syndrome is a really good source of information about your values. The other thing that I will tell you about imposter syndrome is that it is probably something you've already worked very hard on. It's probably something that you've devoted time to get education around. It's something that you've probably devoted experiences and exposure and development around. So the high likelihood is that you're really good at it. Especially when we're talking in a workspace, you've probably spent a lot of time thinking about this, working towards this. So it is absolutely something that you are good at. Again, don't confuse confidence with competence. So I'm going to take a look at the chat. See if there are any questions. A lot of validation about the enough, about feeling enough, about feeling like you belong as a part of communities. Yeah, Angie, I love that. I've never learned to trust. I've learned to trust the seat of my pants. I'm never going to feel prepared enough, but winging it is my superpower. Absolutely, absolutely. I feel like imposter syndrome is somewhat another form of being in the closet. Yeah. Pete, I would agree with that. Say more about that. I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about what you think on that. Oh, yes, absolutely. From that perspective, it is about hiding oneself. And it's also about, being afraid that somebody's going to open that door. Yeah, same here. As another Peter, I'm going to say I like Pete Paradise. Martin, I will tell you that I'm very, very conflicted on the fake it till you make it mentality. I'm very conflicted on the fake it till you make it mentality because, and I'm going to look over here on the Pathable app, I love what Terry just said about reframing. I would much rather us focus on reframing the narrative than faking something. Because faking it always comes with that feeling of inauthenticity that can actually add to one's sense of impostoriness. All right, I'm just going to go take a check over here. So here's the thing, folks. I'm gonna respond to something Rodolfo said in the Pathable chat. I'm in shock. I didn't know I had this. I thought I was just that way. If imposter syndrome is something that you find challenging, then I want to give you techniques and best practices, and we're going to go into those on how to work through that. But I also want to be careful about pathologizing something that really is common. It's very common. We all have some level of imposter syndrome. I mean, again, 82% of people report feeling impostery about something. I'm seeing some folks talking about fake it till you make it doesn't work for depression, for example, so that people just, especially when it comes to depression, faking it can actually make you feel like a little bit more of a fraud. Oh, Shannon, we could go into a whole thing about toxic positivity, but I promise I won't today. All righty. So we have talked a little bit about what is imposter syndrome. We've talked about what it feels like for ourselves. We've talked about a lot of things. And actually, I'm going to address what we talked about, where it comes from. And Kathy would love to hear from the 18% who don't feel imposter syndrome. I have my guesses about who they are. Absolutely. I have my guesses about who they are too. I would guess that they probably grew up in a household where they were part of the majority demographic. I would guess that they were probably not LGBTQ plus and felt the need to hide. And who knows, as we look at the current generation that's growing up right now, we're seeing greater instances of people not hiding who they are. We might see those numbers, that 18% start to change about who's in that demographic. I would guarantee you that, we're talking about people who are not necessarily feeling any sort of socioeconomic squeeze, whether it's housing insecurity, food insecurity, economic or job loss. So there's, I think we can guess who's in that 18% and some, and some very privileged people. and not necessarily privileged, quote unquote, but really privileged in that they didn't get that external pressure. They didn't get that external message that they needed to be better, smarter, faster, etc. So yeah, there's definitely a sense of what we know about that 18%. Alrighty, so we talked about what imposter syndrome is. We talked about what it feels like, what it looks like, where it comes from. So I'm quite sure that all of you wanted to know what to do about it, right? We're here to talk about what to do about it, right? Is that what we're here to talk about? Wouldn't it be awful if I just ended this webinar right now? Oof, God. All right. No, I absolutely hate webinars that don't give you something practical that you can do about the thing that they're talking about. So this is absolutely where your homework is coming in. Alrighty, so what do we do? Alrighty, the first thing that we do is one option is to name it. And I don't mean just saying I have imposter syndrome. What I mean is actually giving it a name. And so I will not share the name of my negative voice. My negative voice has a name. My negative voice is named after one of the people whom I despised in middle school. This person just made my life miserable in very, very careless ways. Very careless ways. Name calling, spotlighting me when I didn't want to be, etc. So I named my negative voice after this person. So whenever I hear this negative voice, whenever I hear that imposter syndrome, the first thing I do is turn to that negative voice and say, you're done here. Shut up now. So naming your negative voice is a fantastic way to externalize it, because once you externalize it, then you have something that you can go after. So the first thing, Peter, that was exactly where I was going. Silencio Bruno. That was exactly, I was laughing because I've been talking about the name of my negative voice for years. And when I saw Luca and saw Silencio Bruno, I was so excited by that. But that's exactly the idea. The exact idea from Luca on Disney Plus, Silencio Bruno. The only difference is mine is not named Bruno. And I don't share it just in case somebody in the audience has the same name. And you know what, Bruno? You don't have to have the same name either. Alrighty, so the first one is to name it. Bruno, we heart you, Bruno. We heart you. I feel every time a really good Karen gets called out. Sarah, we're on the same page here. Alrighty, so the first one is to name it. The second thing is what I call reality testing. And reality testing is a technique that we use in mental health and clinical practice for a lot of things. But reality testing is about sitting and writing down. And you've heard this theme from me. I want you to write stuff down. I have my notebook right here. I write stuff down. I want you to write stuff down. And I want you to write down when you're feeling a sense of imposter syndrome. I want you to sit down and I want you to write down what the imposter syndrome is about. And then I want you to write down all the times you've succeeded in those situations. Because chances are this is not the first time you felt imposter syndrome, and this is not the first time you've been in this situation. So I want you to write down, here's what's going on, and here's all the times I've been successful in dealing with these situations. These are all the times I've been successful presenting. These are all the times that I have been successful leading a project, whatever it is for you. But I want you to be really specific and write it down. And there's two reasons why I want you to write it down. The first one is we are much more likely, and science has shown this, neuroscience has shown this, we're much more likely to remember things when we write them down versus just thinking about them. The second one, I'm going to get to in a minute. All right, so we've got naming it, And you can pick whatever names you want. You can have as many names as you want. Elliot's got 3 names, so he can choose. All righty, the second one is reality testing. And then the third one is a partner or coach. And this is really about making a connection with someone who knows you. It could be an accountability partner. It could be a professional coach. But really what you want is someone who can work through the realities with you. It might be someone who knows you and can remind you of successes you've had in the past. But the real trick here with having a partner or a coach and why we want to talk about it with somebody is because we're externalizing it. Again, in every single one of these instances, I'm asking you to externalize your imposter syndrome. And I'm asking you to do that for a couple of reasons. One, the minute that we externalize something, you have a target. You have something you can look at, chew on, work out. It's so much harder when it's just sitting up in our brains. And the second part is because our brains are these wonderful, wonderful little computers. And these wonderful little computers are, this is the second reason, Sarah. So the first reason is I want you to externalize it so you actually have a target. It's much easier to deal with something when you can look at it, chew on it, etc. The second reason is because our brains are these wonderful little computers that are designed to create the worst possible situation for us. In the world of mental health, it's called awfulizing. I love that term. It's called awfulizing, where we just go immediately to the worst possible situation, the worst possible situation. And that has to do with the fact that our brains are wired to treat emotional fear the same way that we treat physical fear. So there are a number of emotional pains that work on our brains in the exact same way. Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And the one we're talking about here is certainty, certainty that I know what I can do, that I'm capable. And so our brains are designed to create these really awful situations for ourselves. When we externalize them, put them down on paper, or talk about it with someone, it's really hard to believe the nonsense coming out of our mouths. It's really hard to believe the awful things we're saying about ourselves, especially when we hear it and how somebody's reflecting it back to us. So, having people who can reflect back to you what they're hearing, having it come out of your own mouth, come out of your pen onto a piece of paper, really becomes the way to see just how false that message is, just how false that message is. I see Christine has put in, that hasn't worked for me in the past. I'm too good at coming up with what ifs and playing devil's advocate. My husband has tried, can't get anywhere with me. Well, whenever I hear about the devil's advocate, I say, I don't want the devil's advocate. Bring me the big boss. But seriously, again, it's practice. Here's the thing. None of these are going to work for you day one. None of these are going to work day one. It's continued practice. And that's really the thing about any of this stuff. I agree with you, Christine. Oh, stubborn Italians. Oh, let's talk about my grandmother, but no. But seriously, we have an hour here together today. I'm not going to hack everything for you about imposter syndrome. I'm not going to give you every answer about imposter syndrome. I'm only giving you 3 of my best techniques. I've got more. I've got a whole host more of techniques that we could work on. So it really is, especially in a situation like this, where it's a very old voice, and it's an old voice that's been with you for a very long time. It's about trying different techniques. So maybe naming it doesn't work for you. So switch to an accountability partner. Maybe reality testing isn't working for you. So switch to naming it. There might be some others that work for you. Really it's about coming up with what works for you and keeping at it. The old adage about it takes 30 days to make a new habit. That's actually a lie. It's actually a lie. Brain science has disproved that over and over again. What really makes a new habit is continuing to try, continuing to put in new behaviors, continuing to put in changes to ourselves as we keep moving forward. So if one thing doesn't, Stephanie, yes, great question. So these are 3 individual tools, not 3 things to do each time. Absolutely, these are 3 individual tools. 3 individual tools. You could use them all together if you wanted. You could name it, you could write it down, you could then go sit with an accountability coach. If that's what's going to work for you, awesome. But if you only need one of them, in a small case of when I'm feeling impostery, just saying silencio Bruno has worked for me in the past. It's just whatever feels best for you in that situation to help you move past those feelings of imposterness. All right, I'm seeing a good idea from Sarah. Let's all just group chat and be each other's accountability partners. I support that. I will tell you that a lot of friendships have been made at Out and Equal, which is wonderful. Already. VJ, reality testing. Can't wait. Oh gosh, when the ADHD gets the best of you. Reality testing is about writing down all of the times that you were successful in the situation that you're feeling impostery about. Richard, yep. RuPaul, you can learn a lot from a drag queen. Don't listen to your inner saboteur. Alrighty. So, bonus hack, while I ask to see if there are any questions, I highly recommend checking out Green Fox, Blue Fox on Instagram. They are absolutely delightful. They are 2 male foxes who are in love and live together. And I learned about them because of this comic. And initially, when I first saw this comic, I thought, oh, this is fake it till you make it. I don't like that. It's not. It's reframing. And Green is doing a great job. Blue helped Green to do a great job of reframing what he's feeling. He is a brilliant infiltrator in the world of competent adults. Alrighty, folks. So your homework is to try at least one of these. So at some point today, I want you to give your inner saboteur, your negative voice, a name. That's the very least. I want you to give it a name, and I want you to write that name down somewhere. Oh, Kathy, absolutely, really great best practice. Thank you for trying to protect me, and watch it float away. Yeah, that's on the list of additional best practices. Thanking your negative voice for trying to protect you, especially if your negative voice comes from a place of trauma, is a fantastic tip. Bree, you're more than welcome to stick with Bruno. Just don't let Bruno find out, okay? Alrighty, so your homework is to, number 1, at the very least, name your negative voice so that as your negative voice, your inner saboteur, your imposter syndrome pops up, you can tell it to be quiet. I would encourage you to try all of these others, especially as you're thinking about your lessons learned from this conference this week. Oh, Lene, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. When I ask for feedback, it feels like I'm seeking compliments. Is that my imposter syndrome at work? Yes. So I also do sessions on feedback, and I will tell you that the best way to ask for feedback is to ask 2 questions. Question number 1, what is something that I'm doing very well and should continue? What is something that would be even better if I started something new, stopped something new, etc.? So you could frame it as, what's one thing I do well, or what's one thing that I don't do so well? The reason why you want to ask both those questions rather than saying, I just want feedback, is twofold. 1, you're balancing it. So you're saying, I'm asking you to tell me some things that I do well so I can continue to do them, boost them, amplify them, and continue to grow in those areas. And 2, I'd like you to share with me something that I could improve upon. So there's balance there. The other thing, yes, Matt, exactly. Start, stop, continue. The other thing that it does is it gives people permission. When you're very clear about your ask, I'm asking you to tell me one thing I do well and one thing that I could improve upon. You're giving the other person permission to give you that constructive feedback. You're giving that other person permission to tell you the things you really need to hear. The other thing it does is it says, I'm open to growing. I'm looking to grow. I'm looking to build myself and I'm looking to develop. So it's really important that you ask both of those questions so that it doesn't sound like you're just asking for compliments, because people are much more likely to say the nice things about you, which maybe sometimes that's what you need to hear. Alrighty, folks, I am going to just pop my favorite foxes back up. We've got 9 minutes left in the session. I am open for questions. I did not prepare any more additional material. I would love to hear your questions. Again, please do connect with me on LinkedIn and check out my website. I will be adding in a series of events coming up in a couple of weeks. But what questions do we have? Oh, well, thank you, Victoria. I appreciate it. Yes. Oh, Rebecca, really good point. Getting open, honest feedback takes time. The more you ask, the more people believe you that you're open to hearing it. Absolutely. And Chris, that's a really nice reminder. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to yourself. And you're all developing at your own pace and speed and growing. Oh, Akshay, thank you so much. That is very, very kind. That is very kind. Carson says, I had a boss that tore me down every single day. Now I have a boss that makes me feel whole and cares about me. I'm struggling with what my perception to other people is. Is there a rational way to get a good picture of that? Absolutely, Carson. This is really where feedback comes in. Folks, if you're looking to get a really good sense of who you are at work, especially, or even in your personal life, ask for feedback. But ask a wide range of people so that you get a complete picture of who you are. I've worked with a lot of coaches, and the number one requirement that's common to all of them is you must ask for feedback. So going out and asking for feedback all the time and becoming that person that becomes comfortable receiving feedback that you may not want to hear is really important, because it starts to get people much more comfortable giving you feedback. And it gives people permission so that you can get a better sense of who you are. So James, any thoughts on how to differentiate between the gut feeling and the negative voice? So here's what I would think about that. And I'm totally open to other people's thoughts around this. So if you want to put some thoughts about this in the chat, I'd love to hear them. I would say that the gut feeling and the negative voice will cancel one another out. And what I mean by that is, if you sit down and let's say you're playing devil's advocate and you're saying, no, this is my gut feeling on this, then you write down all the times you've been successful around this, or all the times that you haven't been successful around it. Do the reality testing. Because if your gut is really just sourced in fear, then it's the negative voice. But if your gut is protecting you from something that's real, then it really is your instinct playing a part. Again, it's practice. It really is practice. And it's sitting down and doing the reality testing, getting an accountability partner, talking to a coach about it. Because the more you externalize that and the more that you have that mirror back to you, the more you'll hear whether it's your gut or whether it's just fear talking. I hope that helps, James. Kevin, I feel like I'm making excuses, but I'm explaining the history and situation and why, but it comes across as if I'm making excuses. I feel like I missed something there. Kevin, that sounds, I haven't read the whole thing. And, but if you find yourself explaining more than's absolutely necessary for someone to get the gist of what's going on, that might be a good red flag for you. Shift the focus from the problem to the solution. Absolutely. Okay. All righty. So Peter, really good point. Gut feelings protection. The negative voice is just negativity. All righty. How do I find a coach that does not break my bank? Is that even possible? There's a lot of, gosh, honestly, I think a lot of coaches could do a better job of being upfront about their cost structure. But there are a number of companies out there that do some really nice work. BetterUp is a coaching company. I'm not sure if, but I really like them. Anytime you've got a company like a BetterUp or Pilot's a corporate coaching company, those tend to have a little bit more reasonable rates because they're dealing in volume. I would also, absolutely, Peter, that's a great point. See if your job offers 360 feedback. IBM had a very, very active coaching community of practice, and we would, and we've moved that to Kyndryl. So we have a lot of internal coaches. So there might be folks in your organization who have a passion around coaching and who want to help you. So, check your organization, see if there are coaches available in there. All righty. I find if I've accomplished something, it's easier to credit luck or coincidence if someone congratulates me on an effort to not sound like a know-it-all, which kickstarts the is. Erica, one of the practices I would encourage for you is when someone compliments you or congratulates you on something, get into the habit of just saying thank you. Just say thank you. Just say thank you. All righty. I know it's so hard to just say thank you, but again, these are the habits we want to get into. These are the habits that we want to see. All righty, folks, we've got 3 minutes left. Any other thoughts? I will put in the chat, it's Kyndryl. And, unless you're talking about BetterUp. BetterUp is the coaching company that I like. I actually, alrighty, again, folks, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for your time, for your attention, for your engagement. At our height today, we had 314 people, and it seemed like in addition to hearing me, you were all having a great conversation and supporting one another. So I appreciate the gift you've given me today of your vulnerability, of your candor, of your attention. And I really, really thank you for the time that you've spent with me today. And again, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to continue the conversation. Oh, Kathy, thank you so much. That's very sweet. Thank you. So thank you, folks. I'm going to hit stop on the recording, and then I will say thank you so much again.